Morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me? We're testing out a new mic this morning, so if it doesn't work, I guess we'll throw it away. But I'm happy to be here. I don't think it's going to work. I'm happy to be here, and I'm thrilled that I can come preach for you this morning. We've been here since April, and I'm excited to finally start opening up the children's church next week. I hope to bring you guys so much good news to your children for a long time. I want to update you a couple things happening in me and my wife Alicia's life. The first thing is, if you haven't already known, that we are expecting a little one in January. So that is. So just pray that everything goes smoothly, everything's healthy. It's so far healthy so far. We find out the gender sometime this week. So just continue prayers for that. The second thing is that I am graduating from college. I'm graduating from college this week. I finished back in December, but I'm finally walking here in September because of the COVID and everything. So if you want to watch that, just let me know and I can send you the link. I'll put the link on our Facebook page, so if you guys want to watch. It's on Friday night at 6, so if you guys want to watch, there's that too. Before I get in today, I just want to pray for all of us. So would you please bow your head. God, we thank you for this day. We thank you that we can come together as your body, as your church, to praise you. God, we just ask that you speak through us what you want us to hear, what you want our hearts to open up to. We just pray that you just speak through us the gifts that you have given us. And God, I pray that you speak through me the gift of preaching, that I may speak your word to these, your people. Tunakapenda, Jesu, Asante, Bwana. Amen. When I was in middle school, maybe 6th or 7th grade, me and my friends would go down to the local elementary school to play basketball, football, or whatever sport we wanted to that day. And we'd play a sport, we'd have fun until it either got dark or we got tired. And I can remember one Saturday afternoon, we were just finishing up the game of 21, my friends Colin, Austin, Shane, and Sanjay. And as we were walking back home, Colin asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. Colin asked me a question that was so profound, I didn't know how to answer it. And I don't really know why Colin asked me this question. He might have asked me this question because he knew that I was a Christian. He knew that every Saturday night I probably couldn't stay over because I had to go to church the next day. Maybe Colin knew that I was his window of opportunity to learn more about God. Maybe Colin was curious about God. I don't really know the reasons why Colin asked me that question, but he did. And I didn't know how to answer it. I was a young Christian at the time. I didn't really have my own faith yet. I didn't know how to answer the big questions about God. And maybe you're sitting here this morning asking that same question. You see, many people have been asking Christians this question for thousands of years. In fact, other Christians have been asking Christians this question for thousands of years. As me and my friends were walking back home after it was getting dark, we were all talking about what middle school boys talk about, pretty much nonsense. And Colin stops everyone, turned towards me, and asked me that question. Colin says, "Sam, who is God?" Oh, we're going back now. What happened? Hold on, let me see. Are we going back? Yeah. Okay. Going back. He asked me, "Who is God?" I didn't really know what to say. I stumbled through some of the answers, hoping that some of those answers would answer the question for him. But it seemed to spark more questions than it did answers for Colin. And that question has hovered over my brain ever since that day, hoping that I would have answered the question with a little bit more authority, with a little bit more clarity. And maybe Colin would have grown up a believer like me as well. And maybe that question is hovering over you this morning. Who is God? Is God our creator, or is God some genocidal maniac who wants to just kill us all? Is God our protector, or is God some ghost who haunts us at night? Is God our lifeline, or has God convinced millions of people to follow him? Who is God? Who is God to you? Well, thankfully for us, this question has been asked for thousands of years, and even more thankful for us, some of those potential answers have been given to us throughout the Bible. You see, the Israelites, God's chosen people, had an act for turning towards God when they needed help from him, when they needed some sort of assistance. But they also had this act of turning against God when they thought they didn't need him anymore, when they thought they had it all. But we read in the Old Testament countless biblical characters urging and pleading the Israelites to turn back to God. In fact, God has commissioned and called people to the very thing we call them prophets. And one of the big major prophets, Isaiah, uses this urge and this plea to get the Israelites to turn back to God. Throughout the book of Isaiah, we see this urge and we read this plea to Israelites to turn back to God. So if you have your Bibles this morning, we're looking through Isaiah chapter 40. You can use your phones, your tablets. Some of the verses will be on the screen for you, but not all of them. So I encourage you to open up to Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah chapter 40 outlines three major characteristics that answer the question, who is God? The first characteristic we'll be looking at starts near the end of Isaiah chapter 40, starting in verse 27. So Isaiah 40, verse 27, it says this: "Why do you say, O Jacob, and complain, O Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by my God." And then Isaiah says these two questions. He says, "Do you not know? Have you not heard?" He's questioning whether the Israelites even know who God is. Church, do you not know? Have you not heard? And in almost a sarcastic tone, Isaiah says this to the Israelites. He says, "I'm about to tell you who God is, so listen closely." Isaiah says in verse 28, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary. His understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not grow faint." Church, who is God? Isaiah tells us God is strength. I can remember running my first triathlon when I was in 4th grade. Now, I ran this triathlon not because of my own accord, but one of my friends wanted to run it, and she did not want to run it alone. And so I agreed to run this triathlon, and leading up to the triathlon, her mom would always ask me, "Sam, how is training going?" And as a 4th grader, thinking that I was already athletic enough playing baseball, football, excelling in PE, I said, "Training? I don't need training. I already know how to swim, run, and bike. What more do you need?" Little did I know the amount of exertion it takes running a triathlon. And the day came for the triathlon, and I could tell that I was outgunned. I could tell that my competitors were stronger than me, faster than me, bigger than me. And I knew that it was going to be a long, exhausting day. The first leg of the triathlon was swimming. The leg that I was most excited for because I knew in my heart that I was a strong swimmer. 2 laps into the triathlon swimming portion, I was exhausted. But I had to do 18 more laps. The second leg of the triathlon was biking. 2 miles up and down a rocky mountain. But I finished. Next was running. 2 more miles up and down that rocky mountain. As a 4th grader, I was exhausted. But I finished the race. I crossed the finish line. And as I crossed the finish line, I remember thinking, man, that participation ribbon has been well earned. But it was a long, exhausting, tiring, draining day. And I'm sure God doesn't need to prove his endurance, his strength through running triathlons, but for us everyday folks like you and me, running a triathlon is tiring. Even the people who train and run triathlons for a living get exhausted after a race. You want to know why? Because we are not God. We will always get tired. We will always grow weary. We will always get exhausted. But God never gets tired. God never grows weary. God never gets exhausted. And what Isaiah is urging to the Israelite people is not just physical strength. No, we all get tired. Being tired is the way our bodies tells us that we need rest, that we need to relax. But more than just physical tiredness, no, we get mentally, emotionally, and spiritually tired. And Isaiah says God is your strength despite all that. Have you ever dealt with a child who is handicapped in any way? Albeit some of those kids are the most honest, playful, and joyous kids to be around, but it is hard work. I can remember helping out in my preschool Sunday morning class. And each time that I was there, usually this kid would come in and I would be the one looking after him. This child was born blind, but his mind was exceptional. He was a very inquisitive child, and it makes sense. But every time he was there, it was my responsibility to look after him, to give him that one-on-one attention that he so desperately needed. And he would always play with his toys. He'd ask me questions like, Sam, what does this toy do? Sam, what does this character look like? He'd always ask me questions that were easy to answer. But I remember this one Sunday morning, he asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. He asked me a question that was so profound, I didn't know how to answer it. I can remember this Sunday morning clearly. He was playing with his toys as he usually does on Sunday mornings. He was asking me all the same questions that he had before. But he asked me this new question. He turned to me and said, Sam, describe the color yellow. I'll let that sink in for a minute. Describe the color yellow. I mean, how do you begin to describe the color yellow? You cannot describe other things that look like yellow because he's blind. He cannot see them. You cannot describe what yellow tastes like because yellow is not tasteful. It's a color. How do you describe yellow to a blind boy? In that moment, that question set my mind racing a mile a minute until it got so exhausted I didn't even know what to do anymore. I just let him ask a new question, moved on from the subject, and he totally forgot about yellow. But sometimes kids make your mind work. Maybe you haven't dealt with a handicapped kid. Maybe you've dealt with a kid who's berated you with question after question after question, usually asking the question, why? Why? Until it wears your mind down and you just can't take it anymore. Your mind gets tired. Well, maybe you haven't dealt with any kids yet. Maybe you're dealing with someone who's addicted to drugs or alcohol. Maybe they've fallen off the wagon and you're doing everything you can to get them back on their feet. And time again, they keep failing you, they keep failing themselves, they keep failing God. And they toy with your emotions. They weigh you down emotionally. Even still, maybe you haven't dealt with that. Maybe you're in a time of spiritual tiredness. Maybe it feels like the whole world around you is falling apart. That you lost your job, that your marriage is shaky, that you just had a miscarriage, that you just lost your spouse, that you just lost a loved one. Maybe you're doubting if God really is God. Maybe you're doubting if God really loves you. Maybe you're doubting if God really is your strength. Maybe your spirit is just tired. And what Isaiah is saying to the Israelite people, what Isaiah is saying to us, is that God is our strength. Despite our limitations as human, God is our strength. God is our strength despite our weaknesses. The second characteristic that Isaiah gives for us in Isaiah chapter 40 covers the most verses in this chapter. Unlike the first characteristic, he says what God is, and then he explains it right after. He says this in Isaiah chapter 40, starting in verse 10. Read with me. He says, "See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and his arm rules for him." Who is God? Well, Isaiah tells us plainly, God is power. Some translations even say God is mighty. God is our powerful, strong, mighty God. Now, how do we know this is true? How do we know what Isaiah is telling the Israelite people is true about God? How do we know God is powerful? Well, he tells us why in the next couple verses. Picking back up in verse 12, he says this. Isaiah says, "Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hands, or with the breadth of his hands marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales, and the hills in balance? Who has understood the mind of the Lord, or instructed him as his counselor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him? And who taught him the right way? Who was it that taught him knowledge, or showed him the path of understanding?" Jump down to verse 18. Isaiah says, "To whom then will you compare God? What image will you compare him to?" God is a powerful God. How do we know this? Isaiah tells us this. To whom then will we compare God? God has done everything for us. He's created the heavens and the earth. He's created us in his image. God is powerful. And then Isaiah says those two questions again, those sarcastic questions that he asked the Israelites, trying to see if they really even know who God is. Up in verse 21, he says this again, "Do you not know? Have you not heard?" Then he adds this, "Has it not been told you since the beginning? Have you not understood it since the earth was founded, that God is power?" God created the heavens and the earth. God created you and I in his image. God brought you out of Israel, out of Egypt, and brought you into the promised land. God parted the Red Seas for you. God has opened his doors to you. God has been with you forever. God is powerful. Isaiah says, God holds all power. And then he says this in verse 26, "Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing." Like I said, God holds all power. You know, reading through this text this morning, it reminded me of a children's song that I used to sing in Sunday school. It's a song that many of you might know. It's a song that goes like this. "My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do." And what Isaiah is telling the Israelite people is basically the same thing. Our God is so big. Our God is so strong. Our God is so mighty. There's nothing our God cannot do for you. Maybe you haven't heard this song. Maybe you want to experience God's power in a different way. So let me see if I can explain that in a different way. Maybe you're a science geek and you want to know all about God's power. Well, there are about 100 billion galaxies in our universe alone. In those galaxies, there are about 100 billion suns. Each of those suns has about 100 billion stars. And there are about 100 billion black holes in our galaxy, the Milky Way, alone. Our Earth receives 99% of the sun's energy from 93 million miles away. 94 billion miles away, no life on Earth. 92 billion miles away, no life on Earth. A neutron star weighs 100 million tons, but fits into the size of a teaspoon. The Earth produces 4 million tons of energy per second. And over an 11-year sun cycle, it will vary by less than 0.1%. The Earth tilts on an axis of 23.5 degrees. It tilts on this axis because it prevents us from running tidally locked, which means one side of the Earth will get colder and colder as it faces away from the sun, and one side of the Earth will get hotter and hotter as it always faces the sun. This 23.5 degree tilt is the precise tilt that it takes to sustain life. 24 degrees, no life on Earth. 23 degrees, no life on Earth. Church, are you understanding God's power? Hydrogen must convert 1/7,000th of its mass to helium to sustain life on Earth. 1/8,000th, no life on Earth. 1/6,000th, no life on Earth. In our atmosphere alone, there's 21% oxygen, 23% oxygen, no life on Earth, 19% oxygen, no life on Earth. There's 3.4% salt in our oceans, which is the exact same percentage of salt in our bloodstream. 4% salt in the oceans are in our bloodstream, no life on Earth. 2% salt in our oceans are in our bloodstream, no life on Earth. The Earth is 10 to the 27th power meters across, and the smallest subatomic particle is 10 to the negative 27th power. Now, if you average all the heights of humans on this Earth, you would average out to about 1 meter, making us the exact center of everything in this Earth. Our DNA, our cells, and our molecules are constantly working to make us uniquely us. Church, God holds all power. All these precisely two numbers is what science calls fine-tuning science. There are hundreds of these precise, accurate, tiny numbers that make the world sustain life. Now, if we treated all these numbers like dials on a board being turned by something or someone, and you turn just one of these dials by the smallest of fractions, it would mess up every other number and making life not being able to sustain. These numbers are so accurate and precise that God holds them all in the palm of his hand. Church, let me say this again. Our God is powerful. Our God is mighty. Our God is incredible. Our God is so incredible that he holds every little, minute, tiniest detail in the palm of his hands. Because even despite our limitations, God is strength despite our weaknesses. And even when we cannot see it, God holds all power. This leads me to the third characteristic that Isaiah outlines in Isaiah chapter 40. In 587 BC, the Israelites were being taken captive by the Babylonians. They might have felt defeated. They might have felt like God didn't love them anymore. I mean, they're God's chosen people after all. They might have felt like God disowned them. They might have felt like God turned their back on them. They might have felt like they needed to find some sort of relief in something else. So some of them, well, most all of them, resorted to making idols, to worshiping these idols to find that relief. But Isaiah here will give us the third characteristic of who God is. In fact, God himself tells Isaiah who he is. Isaiah chapter 40, picking back up in verse 1, God says this to Isaiah. He says, "Comfort, comfort my people, says the Lord." Who is God? Well, God tells us directly, I am comfort. I am solace. I am your redeemer. I am your place of refuge. God is comfort in an uncomfortable world. Church, believe me, this world is an uncomfortable place to live in. There are people, places, and situations in this world that make me feel uncomfortable. Now, if you don't feel this uncomfortableness, let me give you some of these statistics that I promise you will make you feel uncomfortable. 20 to 40 million people today are involved in modern-day slavery, with a vast majority of them involved in human trafficking. Human trafficking profits nearly $150 billion a year. 71% of all enslaved peoples are women and young girls. 50,000 people are being trafficked through the United States alone, if not more. And nearly 52% of all human trafficking cases in the U.S. involve only children. Are you uncomfortable yet? In Chicago alone, in July, there were 584 reported shootings with 105 homicides. Staying in Chicago just last weekend, there were 66 shootings and 5 fatalities. Staying still in Chicago, over the course of this year, since January 1st, there have been 24 children under the age of 10 shot dead in the streets. Church, are you uncomfortable? This world right now is suffering from a pandemic that has costed tens of thousands of lives. Trust me, this world is an uncomfortable place. You step outside these walls, you step outside these doors, and it will make you feel uncomfortable one way or another. You know what gives me hope? You know what brought hope to the Israelites? God tells Isaiah, comfort, comfort my people. I have been with you through everything. I have the world in my hand. I've been with you since the very beginning, and I will continue to be with you long after you're gone. God says, don't worry. I've got it. I already know that you've been taken into captivity by the Babylons. I already know that your world is in dismay right now. I already know that it's been a hard year for you. God said, I already know you just lost your job. You're struggling to make ends meet. I already know your marriage is falling apart. I already know you just had a miscarriage. I already know that you just lost your spouse. I already know that you just lost a loved one. I already know if you're doubting if I really am God. I already know that you're doubting my strength. I already know that you're doubting my power. I already know that you don't think I can be your comfort. But God says, trust me. I am your comfort in an uncomfortable world. Because when we put our comfort in things that's uncomfortable world, they will never sustain us. They will always fall apart. But God, who's our strength despite our weaknesses, forever. How do we know this? Well, Isaiah says this in Isaiah 40, verse 8. He says, the grass withers, the flowers fade, but the word of our God stands forever. God will stand forever. He will protect you forever. He will lift you up forever. He holds all power forever. He will comfort you forever. You want to know why? Because you cannot find forever comfort in drugs. You cannot find forever comfort in alcohol. You cannot find forever comfort in pornography. Because God is our comfort in an uncomfortable world. You cannot find infinite power in money. You cannot find infinite power in your relationships. You cannot find infinite power in your political party. Because God holds all power. You cannot find everlasting strength at the gym. You cannot find everlasting strength in your abilities. You cannot find everlasting strength in your self-righteousness, because God is our strength despite our weaknesses. And despite all of this, despite all our limitations, all this chaos, destruction, confusion, and disruption in this world, God says, I've got you. Because you love me, I've got you in the palm of my hands. And as I've got you in the palm of my hands, as I'm taking care of you, I want you to look forward. Because someone is coming. Someone is coming who has strength beyond measure, power beyond imagination, and comfort beyond capacity. The Israelite people were being taken into captivity, but God says, someone is coming and he is your strength. The Israelites are being taken by the Babylonians into slavery, but God says someone is coming and he holds all power. The Israelites are being humiliated and defeated by the Babylonians, but God says someone is coming and he will bring you comfort. Listen to these words that God gives to Isaiah to relate to the Israelite people. Starting in verse 2 in chapter 40 of Isaiah. He says this, speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sins have been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice of one calling, in the desert prepare the way for the Lord, make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low, the rough ground shall become level, a rugged places a plain, the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all mankind together will see it. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Make way a path for the Lord, because he is coming. Like I said, he is coming, and he's going to have strength beyond measure, power beyond imagination, and comfort beyond capacity. In this chapter alone, in Isaiah 40, Isaiah references at least 16 characteristics that make God God. He says God is mighty, God is our shepherd, God is strong, God is everlasting, God is understanding beyond measure, God is incomparable, God has measured the waters, God has marked off the heavens, God has weighed the mountains, God has balanced the hills, God has created the ends of the earth, God has directed the Spirit of the Lord, God knows every star by name, and not one of them is missing. God is weariless, God gives power, God gives strength to you and me. And all these descriptions and characteristics that make up God are the same descriptions and characteristics that make up Jesus. For in every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that he is God. Church, Jesus is coming. So you need someone to give you strength despite your weaknesses. God is. You need someone to give you power. You need someone to remind you of God's power. God is. You need someone to give you comfort in this uncomfortable world. God is. You need someone to believe in a living God. God is. You need someone to talk to you. God is. You need someone to protect you. God is. You need someone to look after you. God is. You need someone to hold your hand. God is. You need someone to pray to. God is. You need someone to protect you. God is. You need someone to save you. God is. Because God is our strength despite our weaknesses. God holds all power. And God gives comfort in an uncomfortable world. Church, God is everything that you need. God is everything you need. Everything you need is in God. Everything you want is through God. Everything you are is because of God. God is everything you need. So when it feels like you don't have strength to continue, when you need someone to lift you up, God is. When it feels like you need a reminder of God's capabilities in this world because you think this world is going down the toilet bowl, remember that God holds all power. And whenever whenever you feel alone in this uncomfortable world, remember that God is comfort in an uncomfortable world. Church, I challenge you this morning to turn back to God. Are you listening to the words of Isaiah? Have you not heard? Do you not know? Have you not heard this since the very beginning? Have you not understood it since the earth was founded? That God created the heavens and the earth, that God created you and me, that God parted the Red Sea, that God brought Israel out of Egypt, that God brought his son down to earth to die on the cross, that God sacrificed him for you and me, that Jesus bled his body and broke his own body for you and me, that Jesus rose again from the grave to save us for you and me, that Jesus is coming back for you and me. Because to the Israelites, God said Jesus is coming. But to us today, God says Jesus is coming back. Church, I challenge you today to read the words of Isaiah, to take them to heart, and know that God is strength despite your weaknesses. God, it holds all power, and God is your comfort in an uncomfortable world. Because God is everything you need, and everything in between. Because for whatever you need, God is.